Hello everyone and welcome back to our Shir and Dishu B'Halacha. We are holding today on Reish Nun Amid Beis. We are in Siman Shin Pei Beis and we are on the bottom of Reish Nun Amid Beis in Sif Vav. So it's Siman Shin Pei Beis, Sif Vav. Says the Mechaber. We've been speaking here about being masker rishus from an Eino Yehudi, from a non-Jew. So the discussion has been, what happens when you have a non-Jew who lives in the Chutzner, together with at least two Yiddish households? So we said that in such a case, the Chazal were misaken that the non-Jewish household asers on the Jewish households, and what you have to do is, the Yidden have to be masker rishus. They have to rent the rishus from the non-Jew in order to make the Erev usable. Now the Mechaber says over here, excuse me 1 second, okay. Kol zman she'ena Yehudi, kol zman she'en ha'ena Yehudi chayzer bay, moyel haschirus. As long as the non-Jew does not back out of his agreement to rent his rishus to the Yidden, so the rental is still effective, va'afilu lizman meruba, and it will remain effective even for a lengthy amount of time. Now the Mishnah Berurah explains what we're speaking about over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut in Chav Gimel, Kol zman she'ein hanachri. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Mairi, we're speaking about a case over here, she'scharoi mimenu bistam, where the rental agreement was made with the non-Jew, where they just went to him and they said, we need to be masker rishus from you, we need to rent your rights over here in the Chutzner. V'loi pirish shum zman. But they never spoke about a time. They never spoke about a time period. They didn't say, we're renting your rights in the Chutzner for a year, or for 6 months, or for 3 months. They just said, we have a technical problem, we need to rent your rights in the Rishus. Here's a quarter, be masker in the Rishus, rent your rights to us. But they never delineated a time period. Diz charel is man yodua, because if it would be a case where a time period was mentioned, then kisha avar azman tzarich liskar shenis b'chalinyan. Then when that amount of time would be up, let's say they specified, we're renting your rights in the Chutzner for 6 months. If that's what they said, then at the end of the 6 months, you have to enter into a new agreement with the non-Jew. We don't say that the old agreement keeps on rolling beyond the time period that was agreed upon. So certainly when the Mechaber says over here that the rental agreement remains in effect as long as the non-Jew does not back out of it, he's not talking about a case where a time period was mentioned. And again, if we were talking about where a time period was mentioned, and now there's a question of somehow the agreement ending before that amount of time is up, well, before that amount of time, the non-Jew can't back out even if he wants to back out. That's the opinion of most Achrayim, most Paiskim, is that even if he says, I want to back out, he can't back out. Once he agreed to the rental for a certain amount of time, it's locked in, he can't back out of it. So over here, when the Mechaber says that the rental agreement remains in place until the non-Jew backs out, what he's talking about is where there was no time period mentioned at all. They just entered into an agreement, we are renting the non-Jew's rights in the Chutzner from him for an unspecified amount of time. In that case, it will continue working even for years, unless the non-Jew comes and says, listen, you remember that time you gave me a quarter and I gave you my rights in the Chutzner? I no longer want that agreement to be in effect. And the Mishnah Berurah says, and I cut in Chav Daled, va'afilu lizman meruba. This agreement will remain in effect even for a very lengthy amount of time. Kevin shalai perish zman b'schirus, since no set amount of time was specified. Mahani calls man she'enoi chayzer ha'akum b'ferish. It keeps on rolling and it remains in effect as long as the non-Jew doesn't specifically back out of the agreement. Avol, however, you should know, Im roitza nachri, if the non-Jew wants, yochal lachzer by miyad achar Shabbos harishayna va'oser alav. Again, in a case where no time period was specified, so then if the non-Jew wants to back out of the agreement, he could back out immediately after the first Shabbos. He can't back out before the first Shabbos, but he can back out after the first Shabbos. The Kevin shelo hisker lo yelo b'stam, because since he entered into the agreement min hastam with no time period specified, yachal loymer loy, he could say to the other people, loy kivanti elal Shabbos achas. You came to me, you told me you have a Sabbath problem. You told me that because of Shabbos you need to rent my rights in the chutzner. I agreed, but I only agreed for one Shabbos. I never agreed for more than that. So after one Shabbos, right away, if he wants, he can back out. Now the Ramah says on the top of Reish Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, Ve'eino yochal lachzor mischirosai ad sheyachzer hadamim. However, when we say that the non-Jew can back out of the agreement even right away after the first Shabbos, he can only back out if he returns the money. If he doesn't return the money, then we don't consider it valid, this idea that he backed out. He can't back out as long as he's holding on to the money. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ois Katan Chafei, ad sheyachzer hadamim, he can't back out until he returns the money. Ritzaino loymar, what the Ramah means to say with this halacha is, the Masha Amarnu, that this that we have just said, the Achar Shabbos Rishayna Yachal La'akum Lachzar, that after the first Shabbos, the non-Jew can back out of his agreement to rent his rights in the chutzner to the Yidden. Hainu Davka Kishamachzar Adamim. That's only if he's going to return the money. Dem loikein, because if he's not going to return the payment, Yachal Yisrael loymer loy, then the Yid who rented the rishus from the non-Jew could say, Anoichi kivanti liskar memchal kama shabbosais. My thought process, when I came to you to rent your rishus, my thought process was to do this for many weeks. And the money that I paid you, I didn't pay you for one Shabbos, I paid you for a lot of Shabbosais. And since you're not giving the money back to me, so you're still holding on to the money, then as far as I'm concerned, the rental agreement is still in place. And in such a case, in such a case, the Chazal were mekel, they ruled leniently, and they said that if the non-Jew is not returning the schirus money, then the schirus remains in place. Now we should remember, I just want to point out over here, excuse me just one second. We should remember, when we're discussing all of these cases about the non-Jew backing out, we have to remember that again, why were Chazal Masakin that you have to rent the rishus from the chutzner? Really, rent the rishus from the non-Jew. Really, the non-Jew does not aser on the other Yidden that live in the chutzner. The only reason we have to be masker rishus, the only reason we have to rent out his rights in the chutzner, is because the Chazal wanted to create an uncomfortable situation. They didn't want us living together with the non-Jew in the chutzner. So really, this whole thing, really we don't need to be masker rishus. So over here, the Chazal were mekel, and they said if you were masker rishus, and now he's trying to back out, and he doesn't give you back the money, we consider the schirus to remain in place. However, the Mishnah Berurah does bring down v'harbe cholkim al zeh. There are many who disagree with this, or l'divreihem, and in their opinion, yachal ha'akum lachzar achar Shabbos harishayna afilu b'loy chazaras damim. According to these opinions, the non-Jew can back out after the first Shabbos, even if he does not return the payment. The kevin dolay perish l'kama shabbosais, because since no time period was specified, yachal loymar, the non-Jew has the ability to say, like kivanti ela al Shabbos echos. When I rented it to you, I only had in mind one Shabbos, and therefore after one Shabbos I could already back out. Okay. Says the Mechaber weiter in Siv Zayin. Im sachroi me'eno Yehudi lizman yodua. Let's say you entered into the rental agreement with the non-Jew, and a time period was specified. So you went to the non-Jew and you said, listen, we have a technical issue, even though we said you don't have to explain this to the non-Jew. You went to the non-Jew and you said, listen, we'd like to rent your authority, your ownership over the yard, over the chutzner. We want to rent it from you for 6 months. And here's $100, and we're renting it from you for 6 months. So im sakru me'ena Yehudi lizman yodua, if you did enter into a rental agreement for a fixed period of time, likishe yichla hazman, when that time period is up, tzarich lachzar v'liskar shenis, you must enter into a new agreement. You have to go make up a new agreement, and you have to re-rent the authority in the chutzner from him. Vitzaris lachzar ularev. And after you enter into the new agreement, you have to make a new Erev. De'ein Erev Rishon Chayzer v'Neir. Because the original Erev that you made, based on your first rental agreement with the non-Jew, that rental agreement, that Erev fell apart when the rental agreement expired. Remember what we said. We said that an Eruv Chatzeros is not effective if you have a non-Jew living in the Chatzer. So, your whole Erev was only effective because you rented the Rishus from the non-Jew. Now the rental agreement expired, the Erev expires, because the whole Erev was dependent on that Schirus. That Schirus is gone, the Erev is gone. Now you enter into a new rental agreement. When you enter into a new rental agreement, you also have to make a new Erev. And indeed, I think it's the Bir Halacha brings down that not only do you have to make a new Erev, you have to make a new bracha. Because the old Erev is gone. The old Erev is over a bottle. So you have to make mamish a new Erev together with a new bracha. Says the Chavetz Chaim in Ois Katan Chavav, Likeshayikla Azman Tzarech, when the specified time period for the rental agreement is up, you have to enter into a new agreement. This is true even if the non-Jew doesn't back out. In other words, the non-Jew didn't come and say, listen, the 6 months are up, I'm not standing by the rental agreement anymore unless you enter into a new agreement. That doesn't have to happen. If you specified 6 months, when the 6 months are up, the rental agreement expires. Because the original rental agreement expires on its own. Pashut, the Chavetz Chaim says, it's also simple to understand. Even if the non-Jew will come and the non-Jew will say, you remember we made a rental agreement for 6 months? I want the rental agreement to keep on rolling. Doesn't matter. You still have to make a new schirus. The old schirus expired. Now you have to make a new schirus. The Taz says an interesting halacha. Let's say you are maskir rishus from the non-Jew, umeis, and now he died. V'hiniach yoirish, and he left over a son who's going to inherit from him. Ein moyel masha sachrei min hamoirish. So you went ahead and you rented rishus in the Chatzer from Tony. Tony died, and Tony left a son, Tony Jr. And now Tony Jr. is going to inherit Tony's rights in the Chatzer. Now you entered into a rental agreement with Tony, but now Tony died, and now Tony Jr. is the one that owns the Chatzer. So, says the Taz, that the original agreement with Tony Sr. doesn't work. Does this battle kayach haschirus? Because once Tony Sr. dies, the rental agreement is null and void. Now you have to make a new rental agreement with the son, with the Yerush. The Taz says that this is true because even when Tony Sr. was alive, Tony Sr., if we're talking about an agreement that was for a non-specified amount of time, so Tony Sr. always had the right to back out. Once it's after the first Shabbos that the schirus was in effect, now we said the non-Jew could always back out. So you entered into a non-specified rental agreement. You entered into a rental agreement with Tony Sr. that did not have an expiration date. It was open-ended. So after the first Shabbos, he could have always backed out. So that means that you constantly needed his agreement to keep the agreement in force. Baharaya, the proof of that is, at any time he could have backed out. So that means you were always dependent on his goodwill to have this agreement continuing. Now he died. You don't have his goodwill anymore. Now it's up to Tony Jr. So now the original agreement with Tony Sr. is null and void. Now you have to enter into a new agreement with Tony Jr. Ad kan l'shoinai. That's what the Taz says. Points out the Chavetz Chaim. V'zehu l'shitasai le'el. This follows the Taz's opinion from earlier in Sivav, da'afilu b'sach zman yachal lachzar, that Tony Sr. could have always backed out. Aval lefi ma she'eskimu ha'achrayim sham. However, let's say you entered into an agreement that did have I said that this was talking about a case where you entered into an agreement where there was no time period specified. Apparently, we're talking about a case where there was a time agreement specified. In other words, you did specify that this agreement is for 6 months. Even in that case, the Taz holds that during those 6 months, Tony Sr. could always back out. Even though you entered into an agreement where Tony Sr. said, we're going to keep it in force for 6 months, but if he wants to back out, he could back out. So according to the Taz, even for the 6 months that we agreed upon, you were still dependent upon the goodwill of Tony Sr. So if Tony Sr. died during those 6 months, you don't have his goodwill anymore, so the agreement you made with him is null and void. However, Lefi Mashi Eskimu Ha'achrayim Sham, according to the agreement of most Achrayim over there in Sivav, that when a length of time is specified, now the non-Jew cannot back out during that time period. Then, if he dies in middle of that time, the rental agreement is not null and void, because the thinking is like this: I entered into an agreement with Tony Sr. for 6 months. Once I entered into that agreement, the Achrayim say he can't back out. So that means for 6 months I don't need his goodwill. So now he's dead. I still don't need his goodwill. Even if the inheritor, even if Tony Jr. is saying, no, I don't agree to this, doesn't matter. Seems that the Chazal were mekel, and they said, since you entered into that agreement for Tony Sr., it still keeps on rolling for that time period. Miu, however, says the Mishnah Berurah, that's when you had a rental agreement that specified a length of time. But if it was a rental agreement that was stam, that did not mention any specific length of time, and then the guy died, then it makes sense to say that the rental agreement is null and void. Even if the son, even if Tony Jr. says, listen, I want the rental agreement to remain in force, doesn't work. You have to enter into a new agreement with him. So the Mishnah Berurah over here is making a chiluk. The Mishnah Berurah is saying like this: if you had entered into an agreement with the father that specified a length of time, so then during that length of time, if the father dies and the son, the non-Jew's son, inherits the rights in the chutzner from his father, then the agreement remains in force for that period of time. But if it was a stam agreement, if it was an agreement that did not specify an amount of time, then once the father dies, once the one you made the agreement with dies, it's null and void. The agreement is null and void because he could have always backed out, since it didn't have a specified length of time, a specified duration. Okay. Eis Katan Chav Zayin. V'tzarech lachzar ula arev. So the Mechaber said that if you entered into an agreement for a period of time, once that time period is up, you have to make a new schirus, and when you make that new schirus, you also have to make a new erev. Why do you have to make a new erev? Since the schirus, since the rental agreement you made with the non-Jew expired, memela nispatala erev. The erev also became null and void. Why? De'ein erev moyel b'mkayim akum. Because what was the takanas chazal? The takanas chazal was that a eruv chatzeros is not effective when you have a non-Jew living in the chutzner. So the whole eruv chatzeros that was in force until now was totally dependent on the fact that you were masker rishus from the non-Jew. Once your rental agreement with the non-Jew expires, the erev expires. The erev is now gone. So you have to make a new erev. We don't say that when you enter into a new rental agreement now with the non-Jew, now somehow the original erev is reawakened and it comes back into effect. It's not an effect. Once the rental agreement expired, the erev also expired. And the truth is that this is a little difficult to understand, because, like there are those that ask, I don't understand. Why is the erev no good? You have 19 Jewish residents in the chutzner, and you have one non-Jew in the chutzner. The 19 Jewish residents in the chutzner joined together in an erev. The problem is that there's a non-Jew. All right. So they have to be masker rishus from the non-Jew. So okay, so they entered into a 6-month rental agreement with the non-Jew, and the Erev is fine. Now the rental agreement expires. All right, so you have to make a new rental agreement. But the 19 Yidden that joined in the Erev, they are still joined. What ruins their Erev? When the rental agreement between them and the non-Jew expires, why does that destroy their Erev? And indeed, the Dirshu, I think it's in footnote 43, he brings down the attacker from the Beis Meir. The Beis Meir asks this kasha. He says, why does it destroy the Erev? And he says, he says, b'di'evet, if you didn't make a new Erev, really, b'di'evet, they could rely on their old Erev. The only thing that you could say is, like I explained, the reason why you have to make a new Erev is because that was part and parcel of the Takanas Chazal. The Takanas Chazal was that when there's a non-Jew living in the Chotzer, the Erev is null and void. The Erev does not join the other 19 Yiddish residents into one. The Erev is not effective. An Erev is not effective when there's a non-Jew living in a Chotzer unless you're masker rishus from that non-Jew. So as soon as the rental agreement expires, the Erev blows up in your face. The Erev is no longer effective, and you have to make a new Erev. Okay. Says the Mechaber weiter in Sivches. Im Sachrai me'ena Yehudi lizman yadua. Again, if you were masker rishus, if you rented the rights in the Chotzer from the non-Jew for a fixed period of time, u'besoich hazman, and now, during that fixed period of time, so you entered into a 6-month rental agreement with the non-Jew, and now during those 6 months, u'besoich hazman, hisker ha'ena Yehudi dirasai la'acher. The non-Jew goes ahead and he rents out his house to a different non-Jew. So he's out. He's giving up his house. He's renting out his house to a different non-Jew. So now you have a very interesting situation. You entered into a 6-month agreement with Tony, who lives in Unit 20 in the Chotzer. But now in month 3, Tony ups and rents out his house to Johnny. And now John is in Unit number 20. But you don't have a rental agreement with John. You only have a rental agreement with Tony. Says the Mechaber, Dai b'schiris harishon. The original rental agreement that you entered into with Tony is still in effect, and your Erev is okay. Says the Mishnah, nice cut in Chavches, Lezman yodua. This works if you entered into an agreement for a fixed period of time. Miloshin zem mashma. From this wording of the Mechaber, it is implied that if the agreement that you made with Tony was open-ended, if it wasn't a 6-month agreement, it was an open-ended agreement. And now at some point Tony went in and rented out to somebody else. Now the rental agreement that you made with Tony would be null and void, and you would have to make a new agreement with the one who took over Tony's house. Over here, in the halacha that the Mechaber just said, you don't have to make an agreement with the new tenant. Why? Because you had an agreement with Tony that covered you for 6 months. That means Tony rented out to you whatever authority he has in the Chotzer, whatever ownership he had in the Chotzer, he rented it to you for 6 months. Now he went ahead, he rented out his house to John. He can't rent out what he already rented to you. I'm sorry, buddy. What that rishus that you had in the Chotzer, you already rented it to me. I paid you. You rented it to me. Now you say you rented it to Johnny. I don't recognize that you rented it to John. Now John has an issue. John can take up the issue with you. Now John's not going to have an issue because John doesn't know that Tony rented it to us, and John doesn't care that Tony rented it to us, and it's not going to affect John in any way. So John doesn't have an issue. But Chazal say that by us, once we were kinda it from Tony, once we rented it from Tony, that rental remains in place, even though now Tony went there and rented out his house to John, because he can't give John something that he already rented to us. Okay. In middle of the fixed period of the rental agreement, the non-Jew went ahead and rented his house out to somebody else. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is even true if Tony went ahead and sold his house to John. He didn't rent out his house to John. He entered into an agreement with us for 6 months, and now he went out and he sold his house. So you would look at it, you would say, hey, wait a second. How could the rental agreement that I made with Tony still be in effect? Tony doesn't own anything anymore. Tony's gone. Over here it says the Mishnah Berurah, no, even this is true, even if he went out and he sold it to somebody else. And the Sha'ar Tzion says this is from the Eliyah Rabbah and the Chai Adam. V'hatam, and the reason for this is when you rent out something, that is a form of sale. So if you, Tony, rented it to me for 6 months, that means you sold it to me for 6 months. I own it for 6 months. Now you went ahead and you sold something to John. Fine, you sold your house to John. But the reshus and the chatzar that you sold to me by renting it to me for 6 months, that you couldn't have given to John. He can't sell something that he already rented to me. However, Mr. Berurah does say, V'yesh machmirin b'mecher. There are those shitas that are machmir when it comes to a sale, and they say that, no. If Tony actually sold his house, then whatever rental agreement you made with him is null and void. And like it is brought down in the Dirshu, I think in 47, brings down from the Chacham Tzvi, a very basic chilik between when the non-Jew rents it to somebody else or he sells it to somebody else. If he rented it to somebody else, so then he still has ownership. He still owns the house. So then we could say that whatever agreement we made with him is still in force, because whatever he already rented to us, he can't rent out to somebody else. But if he sold it, so all of his rights are gone. How could we claim that we're still holding on to the rights that he rented out to us? He's gone. He has no shaykhus over here anymore. Okay. Siftes. Chamisha hadarim b'chatzar. Let's say there are 5 people that live together in a chatzar, and they want to make an eruvei chatzeros in their chatzar. So you have 5 Yiddish households, and then you have 1 non-Jewish household in the chatzar. And the 5 Yiddish households want to join together in an eruvei chatzeros. But they know that they have to be masker rishus from the non-Jew. They know that somebody has to approach the non-Jew and has to enter into a rental agreement, renting his rights in the chatzar. So chamisha adarim b'chatzar, 5 Yiddish households that are together in a chatzar. Echad seicher me'ena Yehudi b'shvil kulam. One of them could go over to the non-Jew and enter into a rental agreement to rent his rights in the chatzar. You don't need all 5. All 5 Yidden don't have to go over to the non-Jew and to be masker rishus. Only one of them has to go over and to be masker rishus. Says the Mishnah Berurah, and Oiskot Lamed, b'shvil kulam. The language of the Mechaber is on behalf of all of them. Hainu, says the Chavetz Chaim, shein tzarich kol echad ve'echad liskar mimenu. Each one of the 5 Yidden don't each have to enter into a rental agreement with the non-Jew. Once one of the Yidden enter into a rental agreement, memela hutru kulan. Automatically, all of the Yidden become mutter and tiltal once they made an eruvei chatzeros. The Dirshu in footnote 49 he says over here that when the one Yid goes over to the non-Jew to be masker rishus, he doesn't have to say that I'm renting it on behalf of the other 5. He could rent it on his own. Once he rents it on his own, now he's joined in the Erev together with the other 5. Memela, everything becomes joined together because he has the rishus from the Goy and he's part of the Erev. So now everything is merged together. And the Chazon Ish points out over here, again, like I mentioned earlier, you have to understand, let's remember again, really the rishus of the non-Jew does not aser on the other Yidden, right? Really the dira of the non-Jew should not bring down the Erev of the Yiddish inhabitants of the Chatzar. The problem again is that Chazal didn't want us living together with the non-Jew in the Chatzar. So they wanted to create an uncomfortable situation, and they said we have to be masker rishus. So it doesn't have to be done on behalf of all of the Yidden bishlichus together in the chutzner. As long as somebody has to go over to the non-Jew and go tell him that they want to be maskirishus from him, already the non-Jew is going to say what's going on over here. It's going to become uncomfortable, and then the hope of the Chazal was that we'll terminate this relationship. So we don't need that it has to be mamash a shlichus of all five. One fellow could go ahead and he could enter into that rental agreement. Okay, we're going to stop over here for today. Me'ez Hashem, tomorrow we will continue with Sif Yud. Be well.